The Honeymaker by Gail Gibbons. It is springtime. 2 beekeepers have placed a beehive on a hill. Activity begins around the hive. The honeybees and the beekeepers are The Honeymakers by Gail Gibbons. Honeybees travel to and from the hive. Their earliest ancestors lived about 80 million years ago. The scientific name for honeybee comes from the Latin word Apis mellifera, meaning honey bearer. Honeybees are social creatures. They form highly structured groups called colonies. In a colony, as many as 50,000 or more bees live together and work at their own special jobs. Many honeybees like to make their homes in dark, enclosed places. Often a colony of wild honeybees builds its hive in a hollow tree. Honeybees cared for by today's beekeepers live in box-shaped wooden hives. Wild honey beehive, wooden beehive. Inside the beehive, the honeybees are building an amazing structure called a honeycomb. It is made up of countless 6-sided cells. Stored in many of these wax cells is the food that bees and people love to eat, honey. Three different kinds of honeybees live inside all beehives. There is one queen, about 100 male drones, and thousands of female worker bees. Like all insects, bees have 3 body parts. There is the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Honeybees have other parts too. The long, hollowed tongue, the proboscis, sucks up sweet juices called nectar from flowers to make honey. The 2 antennae, or feelers, are used for touch and smell. The head, 3 simple eyes are believed to be sensitive to light. The thorax, large wings for forewings. The stinger is used for protection. Only the females have stingers. Abdomen, small wings or hind wings. 2 big compound eyes are made up of many eye lenses joined together. The queen is the largest of the honeybees, and she can live the longest, from 3 to 5 years. All the other bees in the colony live for about 2 months except over winter, when they live a few months longer. It is the queen's job to make sure the hive never runs out of bees. To do this, she leaves the hive to mate with her drones. Then she lays as many as 2,000 eggs a day. Drones are usually smaller than the queen. Their only job is to mate with her. Most cells in the beehive are used for storing honey, but some are used for the queen to lay her eggs. These are called brood cells. In each brood cell, a bee will develop and grow. The largest brood cells are queen brood cells, also called royal cells. Drone brood cells are smaller, even smaller than the worker brood cells. The eggs in those cells will become worker bees. Although all worker bees are females, they do not lay eggs. Instead, they do the work of the beehive. Most eggs the queen lays are no bigger than the period at the end of the sentence. After 3 days, a larva hatches from each one. For the next 3 days, worker bees called nurse bees feed the larva bee milk. Then they feed it bee bread. A queen's larva is fed royal jelly throughout its growth. Each larva glows quickly, then spins a silky cocoon around itself. Inside the cocoon, a pupa develops. A nurse bee seals the cell with wax. Little by little, the pupa changes. It begins to look more like an adult insect. The process is called metamorphosis. Queens develop in about 16 days from the time the eggs are laid. The metamorphosis of drones and workers take about 21 to 24 days. Finally, after the transformation is complete, an adult bee chews its way out of the brood cell, an adult honeybee. The honeybee is a worker bee. From the minute she comes out of her brood cell, she is as busy as a bee. For the next 3 weeks, she will have a number of different jobs to do inside the hive. First, she is a house bee, cleaning and polishing the cells. About 3 days later, she becomes a nurse bee. After 10 days of being a nurse bee, she becomes a waxing making bee. She makes flocks of wax in her abdomen and chews them to mold new cells or repair old ones. Wax-making bees are also in charge of storing the nectar and pollen that other honeybees bring back to the hive. Other workers care for the queen. They are her court. The cluster around the queen is continuously feeding and grooming her. About a week later, the wax-making bee becomes a guard bee and begins the outdoor life. Guard bees protect the hive. They chase away intruders with their stingers. They also alert the other bees by spreading a special scent when there is danger. A guard bee will sometimes die in battle to protect the hive and its honey. The worker bee is about 3 weeks old. She is ready to become a forager bee, her last job, but a very important one. Forager bees are the bees you see zipping from flower to flower. They collect sweet juices called nectar from the flowers for honey making. At each flower, the forager bee collects nectar with her proboscis. She stores the nectar in a special part of her body called the corp or honey stomach. The stomach is separated from her other stomach. As she goes from flower to flower, she comes in contact with a yellow powder called pollen. Some of the pollen is collected in little baskets formed by the special hairs on her hind legs. As the forager bee collects nectar, she carries pollen from flower to flower. This is part of a process called pollination. When she has visited many flowers and her crop is full, she beelines back to her hive. Pollination is the movement of pollen from the stamen to the stigma of the same kind of plant. This makes the seed to grow new plants. Back inside the hive, the forager bee brings up or regurgitates the nectar. Then she transfers it by tongue to a hive bee. The nectar is passed by tongue along the hive bees until some of its moisture is gone. Then a wax-making bee places the nectar in a honey cell. There it continues to dry. More and more nectar is added to the honey cell. House bees cluster over the cell and fan their wings to evaporate even more of the moisture in the nectar. As the nectar loses water, it becomes thicker and thicker. Finally, wax-making bees cap or seal the cell with the wax. Slowly, the nectar ripens into honey. Honey is about 18% water. When forager bees return to their hive, they have a special way of telling the other forager bees of important discoveries, like a new location of flowers full of nectar and pollen. They do the dance of the bees. The circle dance. The forager honeybee circles in one direction, turns around, and circles back the other way. The dance tells the others forager bees to look for new flowers anywhere within 300 feet of their hive. The wagtail dance. This dance tells the other forager honeybees that the flowers are farther than 300 feet away. The direction she dances while wagging her tail tells where the flowers are in relation to the sun. The number of wags per 15 seconds tells how far away the flowers are. A forager honeybee can visit up to 10,000 flowers a day. All the nectar she collects in her entire life can make only about 1 teaspoon of honey. To make 1 pound of honey, it takes a nectar from over 1 million flowers. Also, different kinds of honey comes from different kinds of flowers. Honeybees have always been valued for their honey they make. For thousands of years, people have stolen honey from wild beehives. People became beekeepers when they began to make their own hives. Soon, some used hollow logs, others used clay pots. Later, in about 1500, European beekeepers started using upside-down basket hives called skeps. Then, in about 1850, the hanging, movable frame beehive was invented. On top of a hill in a modern beehive, the beehive is stacked in sections. In each section hangs 10 wooden frames where the bees build their honeycombs. To help the bees build their honeycomb faster, the beekeepers place wax foundations in the frame. A foundation is a sheet of wax impressed on both sides with a pattern of honey bee cells. It's time for the beekeepers to harvest the honey. The honeybees have had several months to build and fill the honeycombs. The colder the winter, the more food they will need. The beekeepers move slowly around the hive. They wear special clothes and use special equipment to protect them from getting stung. Back at home in a shed, the beekeepers use a hot knife to cut the wax caps off the honeycombs. Then the honeycomb frame is placed inside an extractor. It spins around at a high speed to remove the honey without breaking the honeycomb. The honey goes into a collecting tank. Next, the honey is filtered through a screen in a cloth to remove small pieces of wax. Then the honey is packed in airtight jars. Sometimes the beekeepers melt down old and damaged honeycombs to make beeswax candles and other things. The rest of the empty honeycomb frames are returned to the hive for honeybees to fill again. For some beekeepers, honey making is a hobby. They use the honey themselves to give it away as gifts. Commercial beekeepers provide stores and shops with gleaming jars of their product to sell. Delicious sweet honey from the honey makers. A Beekeeper's Yearbook.